Hello again, folks. My name's Dustin Cormier, and welcome to How to Rock Astrology. This is more of me showing my big, crazy coronavirus hair. It's getting ridiculous, but you gotta rock what you can. Today we are going to be talking about, hopefully I didn't just lose my laptop, we are going to be talking about Rahu, particularly Rahu and Ketu in the chart through a case study of a beloved figure in my life named Ram Dass. That's Richard Alpert. He was involved in the psychedelic 60s. He was very close to Timothy Leary, although they had a falling out, but they came back together as friends. It's a deep inspiration for my life, born in the year of the metal goat, I believe. Yes, I'm pretty sure he is. 1931. So he's an important figure, and through the figure of Ram Dass, I want to do a little picture of how I use the metaphor we used in our last video, which is a depiction of Rahu and Saturn as the agents of necessary expansion for the spirit as well as for the whole energy field, versus the duality of that with Mars and Ketu as the sustainers of those mental habit forms and neurological samskars in the past which have brought you to your present incarnation. Both dimensions being very important. This is the nature of basically the essay that I'm going to be displaying for you today. And this essay I used as an actual essay for for one of the classes I took in Ryan Kurczak's astrology apprenticeship program. So, I hope you guys enjoy. Basically, we're going to be coming right off where we left off on our last video. Now, I'm going to be showing you guys this. This is basically Ram Dass's chart. I could just fully... Maybe I should. Maybe I should just go on Kala. Sorry if I'm being too loud there. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. And we're going to look up Ram Dass. Can you guys see what I'm doing here? Good. Okay, so this is the chart of Ram Dass, aka Richard Alpert. Now, as I'm going through, you guys are going to be able to look at my screen here while I go through this case study. So, thanks a lot for coming, folks. This is the chart of Ram Dass, of Richard Alpert. Now, the life of Ram Dass is a perfect example of the profound hemisphere symbiosis that occurs when a person's strong Rahu energy, with the help of Saturn, becomes deeply and functionally integrated into an already stable and healthy energy field maintained by Ketu and Mars. So we can see here, like, Ram Dass's Rahu is in Aries. There's lots of little things that we could say. Maybe we should just before we kind of start. Basically, Ram Dass, the picture that we're going to paint here is that Ram Dass had Ketu in Libra. And so the placement of Venus and how good that is in the chart is going to give a sense of Ram Dass's capacity to express through Venus and through Libra some kind of talent, some kind of karmic habit that firmly establishes the sustaining of his energy field, of himself, of all the resources and materials he needs to survive, and of his psyche as well. This part of his personality, having Ketu in Libra, and also in the 4th, of course. These are huge themes as related to Ram Dass. The agenda of Ketu here is through the 4th house. Ram Dass would want to... He will have gotten through all of his past lives and will have a deep imprint in his genes and whatever, in his past life imprint, of having been a retiring person who retreats into their mental awareness of interpersonal dynamics for their emotional security. Libra being the conception of human interdynamics and kind of psychology. You know, Ram Dass, before he was Ram Dass, he was Richard Alpert, and he was a very successful Harvard-trained psychologist, and much of his early life just went into his education. We can see that Ketu in the 4th, this showing an emphasis on the 4th house, which relates to education. The 4th Lord Venus is exalted in Pisces in the 9th house. Now, Venus usually does better when it's closer to the 4th house. Here we see that Venus is in Pisces being exalted, and the 9th house is always a good house for any planet. It's one of the most auspicious houses because it flows with the nature of the ascendant. Now, we would say here, likely the correct thing would be to say that Ram Dass's Rahu being in Aries works a little bit better with Cancer than Libra does. Mars is a better friend to the moon than Libra is. So, Rahu being in Aries, well, so I should finish on the Ketu. What I want to say with the Ketu here is that the Ketu is doing pretty good. We could also, we could look... Can you guys see what I'm doing here? Good. We could look at Ram Dass's Shodasha Vargas. This is basically all the Varga charts. And we would see in here that he's got some interesting things happening with Ketu being in Aquarius and Saturn being its ruler. But I wanted to say that for the sake of this case study, we're really trying to wring out the potentials of the Rashi chart. My idea is that you would take the interpretation of Rahu and Ketu here and apply them in the other Vargas. Because the Vargas are their own thing, but I think that I do talk a bit about the Vargas in my essay. So, Ram Dass got along early part of his life through his emotional fortitude, his capacity to get past and get through emotional experiences. In fact, it's through with Ketu in the 4th house, it's through experiencing one's emotions fully, almost too fully, that they gain power, and they sort of like digest a lot of emotional things, and they put themselves through this. They gain support from others. They're used to getting support from others and digesting and just being a shoulder to cry on with Ketu in the 4th. It's like you want to be a shoulder to cry on for people in order that they can support you. 4th house things, right? Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing, especially because his 4th house lord is well aspected in the 9th house. So he feels like a cultural, a religious obligation, as we know Richard Alpert. He didn't become deeply religious and spiritual, mind you, until like halfway through his life. But even before that, he was compelled by a feeling like he has a role in the world. And this is because Venus is doing well, being exalted in Pisces in the 9th house. And Venus is the Ketu lord here, the 4th house lord. It's also mixed in a bit with the 11th house and with his reputation and networking that he did. Like, he was a well-established Harvard graduate and psychologist, and his parents helped him get there. That also has to do with Saturn and the 8th house and the 7th house. He has a good Saturn too. But let's take it one piece at a time. So that's the position of Ketu and its lord Venus. It's doing very well. We also see Rahu here. It's with Uranus and the Sun, and that's some tricky, funky business going on here. Rahu's lord, Mars, is doing... I mean, the second house isn't the best place for Mars, but we can see the Shadbala of Mars is sufficient. And it is in yoga with the sun, which is a very strong thing. Leo is a good house by natural dignity because for Mars, Leo, the sun, is a friend. And Mars is also a friend to the sun. So there's a mutual, very, very positive mutual yoga going on here between the second and 10th house. Richard Alpert did have, despite the fact that he leaned on digesting emotional material, on his parents' emotional material, on the support of his parents, the support of those close to him, and by supporting those close to him, he did have an emphasis in all of that. But there was a compulsion in him that was healthily expressed to become a standalone in his field by the work that he engages in and that he challenges himself to do as a psychologist, as a person in the field, a well-known person in his field. And it also developed on like his financial reality. It's the second and the 10th sort of correlation there. This is also interesting because Mars is a natural karaka for Cancer ascendant. Mars is the lord of the 10th house and the 5th house. So being in the second house of Leo, there's a lot of important energy going through the sun here, and the sun is in the 10th house in Aries, exalted with Rahu. Now it sucks, unfortunately, that Rahu and the sun, Rahu often debilitates the sun. This is the one thing that's debilitating to this figure. And we could say, when you listen to Ram Dass's experience of his life, he had a lot of struggles with himself, with having confidence, with feeling like his life had a deeper, satisfying reward and challenge and meaning. He was really just pushed into where he was by the support of his Ketu and his 9th house and his family. Now, we've painted a picture of the goodness of, this is a good Rahu. It's healthy with Mars here. Mars is doing well with Shadbala, so is the sun. And so is the Venus here. The Venus is doing well with Shadbala. I mean, you can look at their individual point scars. This is an incredible sun. One of Ram Dass's great strengths was his second lord, the sun. Whereas Mars had some negativity to it. Now, I digress. We can see here, through the interchanges here, generally speaking, that we've got a good Rahu and a good Ketu. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do Ram Dass's chart. Because I was perusing people's charts and I noticed that this one had both going on okay. Now, as you can, now that we've given a backdrop of Ram Dass's chart, or at least of the figures that we're looking at, which is Mars. This is an interesting one because Mars, as we know, Mars is supposed to kind of be the co-conspirator of Ketu. But here, Rahu is in Aries. So the work that Ram Dass does all the time, I mean, Aries is his 10th house, so it's like your constant worldly activity. And the constant activity that Ram Dass does all the time relates to maintaining the energy field, sustaining to Mars, which is Mars as a subcomponent of Ketu, which is the liquid, lizardy thing trying to stay alive in all of us. Mars, while maintaining the energy field, learning how to maintain its own energy field, and for others as well, he's a psychologist. He's a yoga guy. He's into health and learning how to properly express the psyche and to put it to its best effect. As he does this for himself, to keep himself alive, he's challenging himself to go forward through that activity at the same time, because Rahu is in Aries. So Aries is the lord of Aries, which is Mars, expresses the will of Rahu to transform and to bring venomous, desirous transformation and expansion energy into itself. Willful energy. And we will eventually talk about the Saturn as well. Saturn gaining what it needs to endure, to sustain Rahu's compulsion to transform and to expand its capacities. Saturn sustains that very well by being in the 7th house, where it's strong with Digbala. It's got good Shadbala. I mean, we haven't even talked about the Lajatati Avashtas for any of these, and Saturn does get hurt quite a bit. Saturn is the one planet here that really gets wrecked by the Lajatati Avashtas. You can see that Mars and the Sun are both at hard angles to Saturn. Mars is almost kind of like opposite Saturn, as we can see. Mars hits Saturn at 42 points. And the Sun also is basically somewhat trine to Mars, as we can see with those 12 points. Not very much, but it's something. It's enough to really... It's more about Mars. Mars inflicts huge points to Saturn, and it's the will, his desire to expand farther and farther and farther probably ruined some of the business contracts and associates that he had right in front of him. But even this willfulness can only do so much to deter Ram Dass, because he had a good Saturn. It's the network, it's the businesses that he held together and he felt compelled to keep moving forward with through Saturn here as the 7th and 8th Lord. So the Saturn is good too, and that's something that I've been wanting to express here as well. So, with all of that being said, let's speak a little bit to the actual essay. I just want to make sure you guys can see me. Very good. Okay. Now this is the essay in question. The life of Ram Dass is an example of the profound hemisphere symbiosis. Hemispherical, I mean relating to the brain. It's a hemispherical symbiosis that occurs when a strong Rahu energy, with the help of Saturn, as we can see going on in this chart, becomes deeply and functionally integrated into an already stable and healthy energy field. It's maintained by Ketu and Mars. How's my battery on this guy? Good. So Ram Dass's nodes, mostly, there's some travails going on in here. It's really the Mars, if anything, who... Saturn is given some trouble by Mars. It's basically the big sort of picture going on here. Mars also has big aspects from Saturn as well. This doesn't damage Mars in the Lajatati Avashtas, but that's still 55 points from Saturn. It still counts as a big malefic aspect. Just as Mars is kind of opposite Saturn, Saturn's also opposite Mars. Sorry, I just want to get these points out because even the Sun also has huge aspects as well. Say the Sun's getting big aspects from Saturn, and from malefic Mars as well. Although Mars doesn't hurt the Sun as much because they're friends. So these are all the things that we have to consider, of course, when we're discussing the nature of interpreting Rahu and Ketu in a chart and integrating them all. It's the strength of these planets and their compatibility together which allows them to work together and create this hemispherical symbiosis in the brain. So the nodes in this chart in Ram Dass's life, they worked in mutual accord throughout his career to sustain and inspire him towards greater goals and personal heights, Rahu and Saturn, while keeping him stable and influential, even in hard, transformative times. Positive Ketu and Mars. We can see this interplay by observing the state and condition of his Ketu and Mars, the state and condition of his Rahu and Saturn, and finally, the ways in which these figures naturally integrated themselves in his personality. Ketu is... Okay, so yeah, if you guys watched our video before, we talked about Ketu as the kind of like the producer of a franchise, the writer of a franchise. While Mars is the coordinator and director of the movie, who's kind of really taking the will of Ketu and saying, okay, I know what I need to build in order to get this thing, this operation, this life working in a long-term trajectory that will sustain me well for the rest of my life. Now, it's up to Mars to bring together the forces of the will that would enact what Ketu thinks is the right thing to do. So, Mars is important to every Ketu. But Mars is a particularly important figure in any Cancer rising chart. So we can see here he's Cancer rising because it's a Yoga Karaka. It's the 5th and 10th Lord. 10th house is Aries, 5th house is Scorpio. So with Cancer people, we find that maintaining and commanding all the planetary forces of the will in the energy field. This is Mars as the general. Mars, this is wrapped up in any Cancer person's creative spirit, the 5th house, as well as their 10th house of activity in the world. So Cancer's activity in the world is this, it's like a disciplinary thing that they do for themselves. It's Mars's discipline is how Cancer gets through things. And Mars's discipline depends on one's capacity to have a healthy Mars, which is guided to constructively use all the powers of its will to enact its feeling of what's right, its feeling of what's noble, and feeling of what's necessary right now in every moment. So Ram Dass subscribed to the mentality that the self in one is the self in all. So it's natural that he uncovered something of his creative path, his 5th house, Scorpio, Mars, and his career, 10th house, Aries, which would reflect the theme of taking care of oneself. This is kind of something that Cancers tend to do. Their activity in the world reflects how to get in touch with one's own primal, willful energy of Mars. That's kind of what they do throughout their activities in the world. And that's how they get along best in whatever field they're into. So this kind of this theme of Mars is a common thing for Cancer risings. And this led naturally to his profound interest in the field of psychotherapy for a career and a hobby. Now, lots of Cancer people figure out in different ways how to put the forces of their mind to whatever they want to do, whether they're a chef or they're they build a family, or they have some very professional craft that they want to do because the 10th is expressing through the 5th house. Ram Dass's craft really related to humans. Cancer rising often does this again because of what Mars is. So this is what we have to consider, is that Mars was not the healthiest planet in his chart. And I'm remembering, I can see here that Mars received malefic Rashi aspects from Rahu itself, Ketu, and the Sun. Rahu, the Sun, and then Ketu's down here. And these are all aspecting by Rashi aspect. If you don't know what Rashi aspects are, they're a Jaimini technique, which Asheville Vedic Astrology propounds as being one of the critical texts for defining the astrology chart. Jaimini, that is. And Jaimini is considered important by everybody. So if you want to learn more about Rashi aspects, it comes from Jaimini. So Mars receives malefic Rashi aspects from Rahu, the Sun, which are both malefics, and also Ketu. It also has a meek yoga power score. Where would that be? Down here. It's the Ishta times Subha times Digbala, or Subha Dig. It's 2.5 positive points, 16 negative points. If you want to know more about that, that's another video that I'm going to have to do, but it's essentially a formula that that one comes from Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. Ishta is something that you kind of get from like Shadbala for a planet. Subha is like dignity throughout the D1 chart, but also like 7 different ones. The Sapta Vargas combines them all together. And then Digbala. That's why Digbala is important, because it holds a planet's power to express whatever yoga it's involved with. So Mars has big negative score points, which means it readily expresses the hard things that it's involved with, which here includes Saturn. It hits the Sun. It hits a lot of things, actually. It hits Venus, but particularly it's the damage to Saturn that really rocks Ram Dass in a sort of unhealthy sort of way. But yeah, so it has a deep capacity to express negative self-critical points. Where Mars can be good, it can be disciplined, and if there's lots of green points here, then a person could express their discipline. But here, Ram Dass is more compelled to express more of the negative capacities that his Mars has the capacity to express. I mean, it's placed not so bad, but these Rashi aspects will bring out more damage. So, something that's helped by this, something that helps this, is that the Sun, the dispositor, you can see that Mars is in Leo. So the Sun, which is ruled by Leo, is what's holding and carrying Mars's energy. And the Sun is doing pretty well in Aries, exalted in the 10th house, where it's got the highest strength it needs. Again, Rahu can debilitate the Sun, but it's really the fact that the Sun has such good Shadbala. It doesn't have that many benefic aspects to it, but it has some. And just being in the sign of Mars, it has the full Shadbala and the Lajitati of Ashtas from Mars. But the Sun does take another huge hit from Saturn as well. But ultimately, the Sun is doing pretty okay here. It's being aspected by malefic Mars, which is a bummer. But that's really about it for the Rashi aspects. So despite Mars is in mutual yoga with its friend, the Sun. So the Sun is, although it's stunned by Rahu, Ram Dass never really felt, even though he had a lot of sun coming through him, he helped a lot of people. He was really driven to express the heights of his own character and nobility. He was pushed really hard to get the best of himself. And we could see that in the positive Sun. The thing that Rahu did is that no matter how much Richard Alpert, Ram Dass, did for himself through his career, he felt a little bit crippled. He felt like he wasn't doing enough. He wasn't happy. He didn't feel like he was really being that enriched and challenged and being put to his most noble effort. Even though he has an incredible Sun here, and he did, objectively we could say he did good even before he transformed himself, being a Harvard graduate, and he had lots of money and he had lots of fame and people loved him for what he did for people, but he didn't feel good. He didn't feel like he was expressing the nobility of his Sun because of Rahu there. But despite that, his strong solar spirit still drove past all emotional agitations, and it moved forward with its responsibilities, supporting Mars as Ketu's stabilizing agent, but also Mars as Rahu's lord and dispositor. So Mars is really kind of carrying, whenever Rahu, who is in Aries or Scorpio, Mars takes on a dual role of not only holding the energy through his psychology, through Ketu, through Libra, through Pisces in the ninth. That activity is sustained by Mars, by his capacity to constantly create an identity for himself in a mixing with other people by having the 10th Lord in the second house, intermixing with businesses, intermixing his energy with others close to him. That's all second house themes. So by Mars doing that, by Mars getting business, by Mars building a financial and career-driven ground for himself, the second house, opportunities through people, etc., he is both engaging Ketu to keep him alive, but also Rahu to expand him and to give him something to push himself even more through. So Mars is important, hugely important for Ram Dass. It was Ketu, whoopsie doodle. It was Ketu in Libra, the fourth house, with its Lord Venus exalted in Pisces, the ninth. This produced Ram Dass's desire to study hard, pushing him to receive high educational honors and take creative leaps in his psychotherapy practice. It's this well-placed Venus, the psychologist, in Pisces exalted in the ninth house. High education, high honors, and creative leaps in his psychotherapy practice. Also, this just shows that Ram, he felt there's a deep compulsion in him to serve the world, ninth house, by invoking an emotional awareness. It's Ketu in the fourth house in Libra. For himself as well as for others. He had a deep emotional sensitivity. And it was, if it wasn't for his strong 10th house, he would just have this emotional sensitivity, but he would be his own little solipsism, his own little world of sensitivity that he couldn't help anybody through. It's the Rahu in the 10th that brought him out into the world in order to use this sensitivity of Ketu. So throughout his early life, the predominant intent of his skyrocketing career as a Harvard-educated doctor was the emotional fortification of Ketu in the fourth house. That was at the start. That's what really pushed him forward is security, emotional security, feeling like his parents loved him, and then also he had financial security and nurturing and support and resources as well. It's all fourth house things, Cancer-y things. Dr. Richard Alpert received much acclaim for his articles in his practice. It's because Venus also rules Taurus, which is his 11th house. And his work as a Harvard-trained psychoanalyst gave him the notoriety he sought in friends and family. His family values was the fourth lord exalted in the ninth. This reflected a desire. He found emotional satisfaction that kind of like he's by satisfying his parents. But it's not just his parents. He would not be emotionally satisfied unless his actions reflected a cultural timelessness and responsibility, which spoke to ninth house dharmic themes. We can see here that he found emotional fortification through things that have cultural tack to them. Timeless tack, wisdom, experience. Now, all of these chart dimensions relating to Ketu, this is the picture that Richard Alpert's Ketu paints. It says the metaphorical movie franchise that was Ram Dass's life. It eventually adapted, but this was the main intent of the movie franchise. He had, it was an epistemological and categorical sense of self. A psychoanalyst of the Libra sort. with an academic eye for recognizable errors in human psyche and behavior. That's both in an experienced level of training from the 9th house, but also an academic from the 4th house. It's a dire desire to adapt, having Ketu in the 4th. The fact that Venus is well placed shows that he had avenues to express this Ketu in the 4th, which wanted to adapt and to get higher in its self-knowledge. The placement of Venus shows that he found that in his life. So this was a stable energy field, stable Ketu. It's a stable identity narrative, something that he could, not only did he do well with, because it's in the 9th house and people loved his work and it was effective, but not only that, it's satisfied what the 4th house is trying to do, which is this moksha feeling, like you're opening to something that's fulfilling to you at an emotional level. Stabilizing, securing a foundation. Even though it's Ketu and it's a past life pattern that we want to get away from, and it was that for him. If he held on to his Ketu, he would have never developed farther. But that Ketu in the 4th house did supply him with emotional fortitude. Even though he eventually wanted to transcend needing that emotional fortitude, everyone still needs a 4th house. This is the tricky way that you got to deal with the nodes in your chart. It's the reason why I'm doing this whole video. So this is a stable energy field, a stable narrative of self that could be built upon and adapted to fit new data, Rahu and Saturn, while still retaining its essence, its functionality, its long-term use and sustainability. Now, since he had a good Ketu, he eventually transformed, as we're going to see, but he kept these themes of being emotionally fulfilled by his work in the world, his work in the world, in expression and creativity and all the 9th house things that he did. But as good as this Ketu was, at some point, Dr. Richard Alpert, he realized that he could not be satisfied by climbing ladders in order to rectify his emotions in his parents' eyes. That was the negative karma of this Ketu in the 4th, right? It's this addiction to the rectification of the emotions through the eyes of those that are close to Ram Dass, and generally in the eyes of others. It's Ketu in Libra, just at its pure essence. Libra being others. This person survives by catering and being a host for the emotional realities. It's the emotional reality of the self, 4th house, is sustained by awareness and serving and business and correlation and observation of other people, others, Libra. And this emotional strength in the 4th house, which was Libra, also sustained, that was the avenue through which Ram Dass sustained himself, because Ketu was there. Ketu being that sustaining principle. Now, he realized, though, that while this did sustain him, it would not ultimately satisfy the hunger in his human spirit for novelty and for challenge and spiritual transformation. It would take the inclusion of some agent of expansion, some obstructive, yet critically challenging force of fate. It's Rahu and Saturn. It would take something like this to orient the excess of Ketu into metaphysical winds of soul that would make him fly. I like to say that Ketu is a little bit like the wind, and it'll push you around. And if you set up a sail, you can really get pushed around by that wind, and it can push you forward. But when the wind gets super heavy, you have to be able to take that sail down That's Rahu and Saturn. You have to be disciplined and discerning and say, I cannot use the wind right now because it's pulling me in the wrong direction from the draw of my spirit. A good sailor knows when to put the sail down when the wind is taking you the wrong way. Aim your ship where you want it to go and just keep buoying your way forward. Don't let, adjust the sail, adjust the Ketu, even put it down when you need to, so that the wind of Ketu is put into the right use. So that's my point here. Rahu and Saturn would take the talents of Ram Dass with this fourth house expressing through Libra, and that Libra expressing itself through the ninth in Pisces. It would take Rahu and Saturn to make this pattern more than just that, more than like dependence on the views of others, more than just a desire to express a cultural responsibility and a timeless, proud responsibility, that ninth house vibe. So this is where we bring in the 10th house, Rahu, and etc. Well, actually, we start with Saturn as an expression, as this enduring maintainer of this energy of going forward into something new. Saturn was always the thing that grounded Ram Dass in realities, kind of like a limit, but it was like not even a limit, but a channeling. It's like a pipe. It's almost like the Ketu and Mars energy are this like bigger pipe, and Saturn is like a particular pipe that put his potential energy into particular goals, particular confrontations with people, particular business interests and contracts, jobs, identities, working with certain doctors, certain researchers that would invoke opportunities for him to write and to get jobs. This is his Saturn in the 7th house. Now let's read it a bit. Saturn is its own home, Capricorn, in the 7th house. It has decent digbala. Let's just take a quick little peek there at that. That's what this is. Sorry, I'm just going to adjust my legs here. This SD is basically digbala. It says Soba digbala, but just so you guys can just trust me on that. This is a picture of the Shad Bala of Ram Dass. We can see that his Saturn has 58 points of digbala. It's huge. And as we know, digbala is one of the very important qualities that gives any planet its ability to express yoga power. Now, this Saturn isn't technically in any yogas going on, but it's got decent Shad Bala, decent digbala. It has the capacity. It's in the proper relationship with the Lagna to express its natural inherent qualities. And that's a good thing for Cancer. Cancer, it's always a good thing for a Cancer to have Saturn in the 7th, because Saturn is also in its own house here. So that's good. It's got a decent yoga power score, the Ishta Sabha Digbala. So, the only thing that sucks about it, and it hugely sucks, this deeply debilitated this Ram Dass' Saturn, and it was getting wrecked in the Logitati of Ashtas, which Ernst Wilhelm has said if you look up, Ernst Wilhelm has a great article on the Logitati of Ashtas. It's the states of the planets. And it tells of how the interaction of planets at their nature, as friends, as enemies, as planets with an intention, this is the deepest definition of how the planets can use what's around them to enrich and express the potentials of the chart. So, excuse me. So, this is a really heavy, tough score, 193, and this Saturn is deeply agitated, probably, by Mars. I would guess I would call it starved. So we could even look up in Ernst's online Google his article. We could look up what it means when the sun is starved by Saturn. I mean, blah. What it means when Saturn is starved by Mars. But I digress. It's something to keep in mind. Not only all that, but Saturn also has some tough aspects from... Mercury actually supports Saturn by the Rashi aspects, which is a huge help. Saturn being enshrined to its friend Mercury like that. Mercury is probably a huge help for this Saturn. I can just see that Mercury is hitting Saturn at 39 points. It's considered a malefic here. Is that correct? Yeah, I guess it is. So Saturn, let's see, Mercury. Yeah, so it gives Saturn 170 points in the Logitati of Ashtas, and that's basically what's stopping that Saturn from completely sinking. So the point of the whole Logitati of Ashta thing is that all these other planets took a lot of Ram Dass's awareness. And it was almost like, this is part of the reason why Ram Dass struggled in his early life, is that he had all of these things right in front of him. But he had an overambitious sun. Like, he had a lot of sun energy. And that wouldn't be so bad, except for the fact that it's in this heavy aspect to Saturn. More particularly the Mars, actually. It's good that his Saturn has strength. It's good that his Sun has strength. It's good that his Mars has strength. It just happens to be so that this Mars is opposite the Saturn, where it is. So he pushed himself. It's the nature of him pushing himself through Mars and the Sun was like hard on himself. That's usually what happens when Mars starves Saturn. So, now that we know a little bit about this Saturn, we can talk about what he might have gotten out of it, as well as how it might have harmed him with its negative aspects. Ram Dass was compelled to gain traction in his social activities and business contracts. 7th house. It's the 7th lord, Saturn. Even through his parents' esteemed inner social circles and contacts. It's an 8th house vibe. His parents, as well as just associated contacts with anyone who he would partner up with through the 7th house. We could even say that Timothy Leary was a big part of this. Anyone that Ram Dass would be like married to brought him a lot of extra social networking, because that's just what his Saturn is. Whether this marriage is a legit marriage or whether it's business partners. So he had his Saturn set up in a way that he was supplied with the necessary networks, resources, and inspiration to endure through times that might transform his current state of life into something better. Whenever someone came to him with an opportunity, he had the social reckoning and people close to him, and even resources through other people, the 8th house Saturn aspect of the Saturn, which could pull him to these other places. It was ultimately, though, it was more about his will that would get him farther. Through Rahu, through Mars, through what he did to maintain his will, his pushing, and everything in his creativity. It's mostly Mars that would get him there. But Saturn, being an adjunct of Rahu, Saturn is what he used to wrangle and hold the network contacts and responsibilities that met him along the way. Dr. Alpert eventually eschewed his comfortable Ivy League status in high American society in order to put pressure on his deepest desire for the solar-driven dynamic in his chart. And this is what's going on with Rahu in the 10th house of Aries, kind of conjunct the sun there. Well, very conjunct the sun. So this kind of is going to say that at some point, Saturn found a network, found a particular reason to go and expand. And this is when, if you know the story of Richard Alpert, he started to transform. But before we get there, so Alpert, before his big transformation, he did some like social mirroring, emotional social mirroring. It's the fourth house through Libra, through this mirror. He projected an image to others of what he thought others wanted to see. He's talked about this in his biographies. And he had a way of aspiring for the heights of experience where his field of expertise was concerned. He wanted to always get the best of just what would pull him forward. And even though he was on a certain trajectory to be a certain type of psychologist, he was always looking to see what's the hip thing, what's hot on the topic, and what's going to get me to be a recognizable, to do recognizably well in whatever it is that he's interested in this case being psychology. The 10th house and the 2nd house in his family, the 2nd house relating to family. He used his family a lot to expand what he could do in his field. So his exalted sun and Rahu in the 10th house of Aries, channeled responsibly, although somewhat unstably, through the Sun-Mars mutual yoga in the 2nd and 10th houses. All of this stuff spoke to Richard Alpert's capacity to keep changing and transforming his works and his livelihood to fit a certain transcendental intuition of his. At some point, it did become like almost like business at a point. He wanted it to be like, this is a good Ketu in the 4th with that Venus there. Ram Dass had the type of, he was almost poetic in a lot of ways. He had a deep internal depth of experience, and he could turn a dewdrop of experience into an ocean of his own analytical fascination, and he could daydream if he wanted to, and he would have felt compelled if he wanted to. If he didn't have a good Rahu and Saturn, he could have just stared into his internal depths and done a lot with it, helped others with it, but it's because of Rahu in the 10th that he turned this dewdrop, which he experienced as an ocean. He said, it's not enough for me to turn a dewdrop into an ocean. I want to see the ocean and turn every dewdrop in that ocean into an ocean of oceans and expand it. Just that's my metaphor there. So that's why he had this, he had this transcendental intuition at some point that he realized is he wanted to open others to transform themselves based on higher callings in the psyche that he understood in them and in himself. But that could only go so far as his own capacity to let go of the past, his own capacity to transform himself and to really be in it, not just observe the fact that he should transform himself, but to let go of the observation and move into the space of beingness that's at the heart, that would actually challenge him, and to move into the fire of real confrontation with what he wanted to be. The 10th house, coming out into the world, challenging oneself in the sphere of others, and with a legit authority on all these things that he thought he had nailed down. A legit authority of the emotional variety. And that's what we're going to find he met when he went across the ocean. At some point, he let go of his emotional attachment to forms and theories of the psyche. And he wanted to experience a real, lived version of happiness that had no organized structure to it per se. Now we're leaning into Aries, the Aries aspect of his 10th house, which is more about doing than thinking, more about immersing than analyzing, more about instinct than forethought. So, Alpert, eventually, lo and behold, he permeated past the limits of his karma when the psychedelic 60s revolution began to take hold of Vietnam-era America. This cultural phenomenon, it's the psychedelic 60s, right? Things are transforming all around him. That's probably Uranus kind of sitting there in his 10th house. This phenomenon happened right along his apparent social prestige at the time, which was very good. Again, everyone around him loved him and loved what he was doing. And this caused him to actively explore different transcendental, New Age, experimental operatives, which were unprecedented even by his formal education and family values. It's the mark of a pioneer. Someone going against the grain, someone even going against what feels familiar, the 4th house. So the Rahu is actually saying, this feels weird, and for some reason, that feels important and good. That's Rahu in the 10th in general. Now again, that can be a good consciousness, but if his Mars was really, really badly placed, which it's not too bad here, it's got some damage to it. Saturn really messes with this Mars. And he did a lot of degenerate sort of things before he started to figure out what he wanted to be. But, I digress. Having Rahu in the 10th gives you the will to do this, to have this mark of the pioneer, to go against that which you are emotionally familiar as well as socially familiar with. Aries is more of like that, like socially unfamiliar. It's like you're just going by instinct and weirdness. And these are the kind of things that Rahu in the 10th brings. And it was his Mars that allowed him to channel this fascination. Because he still had a good Mars in the 2nd house. He's a psychologist. He could basically tell everybody, I'm on this new thing, so trust me. And he could still keep doing his work, but he's saying to everybody, I've got this new thing. It's because Rahu is not only maintaining the energy field, but also channeling Rahu. Mars. I hope I said that right. Mars is maintaining the energy field, but also channeling this Rahu in the 10th. So it was in 1967, at age 36, around his Rahu maturation, that Dr. Alpert set across the ocean on an expedition to see India. And while there, he had a mystical experience with a man who he would come to call his guru. This man confronted Alpert's quivering inner heart at a time when everyone around Richard Alpert, the Harvard-trained psychologist, everyone around him insisted that Richard knows how to be happy. He's a Harvard League psychoanalyst. If he doesn't know, nobody knows. He's got it figured out because it's the 60s, and all the answers were out in the 60s because I guess anyone at any time could think, if you're at the top of your field, that you're really in the know. And this is how everyone treated Richard Alpert. Everyone says, he must know. And what freaked Richard out is that he didn't know. He just had the piece of paper that said, I got the education. But he didn't felt like he really knew how his own happiness operated. He seemed to be able to do it for others, but not for himself. So he had a mystical experience with this man who confronted his quivering inner heart. While everyone else was saying he's a Harvard League psychoanalyst, he knows how to be happy. The image of happiness, the delusion of happiness, the surface, it's Ketu in the 4th with Libra. It was too karmically imposed for Dr. Alpert to get truthfully in touch with. Here, Ram Dass was confronted with an emotional barometer with this man, this guru. He found an emotional barometer that saw through this delusion of grandeur and exposed Richard Alpert's own illusions to himself. It was then that Ram Dass employed his positive appointed Rahu energies to alter and expand the movie franchise which had so far defined his life. In typical Rahu in the 10th house fashion, Richard Alpert began to face his emotions head on, under the public spectacle with all others. And it's the 10th house now. Now he's saying, okay, everybody, this is this person that I've been, this is this energy that I've been doing. What does it all look like now that I'm here? And he would say this to everybody in a public sphere, speaking. We'll notice that, of course, the 2nd house relates to speech, relates to solidifying an idea, speaking, vocalizing, and such. That relates to the 2nd house, to the voice. And his 2nd house lord is in the 10th house. It's the sun. And that 2nd house is, of course, where Mars is, which is channeling all this stuff. So it's like his voice, his experiences are being expressed in the public zone where everyone can see it. He's laying himself bare and letting everyone see. It's almost like a Christ-like thing, where he put his self on the cross for all to see and said, everybody can achieve the deep sacrifice of the inner richness of the spirit by doing what I do, by sacrificing the way I do, by pushing myself, showing myself to myself. These are all 10th house related things coming through still, his Ketu. This is a huge point, again, that I want to bring through, but we'll get there. Ram Dass employed his Rahu energies to alter and expand the movie franchise which had thus far defined his life. In a Rahu in the 10th house fashion, he made a career out of the work he did on himself. Eventually, he made concise, visual, artistic images that would reflect on his personal growth experiences. He made like a journal thing, and this was what became Be Here Now, a classic book of his, which would come to make him a lot of money. Notice that Mars is in the 2nd house in yoga with the sun and Aries in the 10th. It's like all of this public spectacle of the growth that the nature of his instincts brought him, the nature of facing his instincts, facing himself, facing his nature. This is all Aries stuff, facing his identity. These are things that he did, and it's the nature of facing identity, facing spirit, which was his 10th house, which is where Rahu wanted to grow, and which channeled itself through the 2nd house to make him an actual book that he could sell for fiscal financial value. It's the 10th house and 2nd house working together. Powerful thing. So Ram Dass became a household name of Eastern and Western, cross-cultural, mental health, and spiritual philosophy. The movie franchise of Richard Alpert's Ketu provided a foundation for him as an aspiring Ivy League professor with much cultural wisdom through which he could... There's a lot going on here. The movie franchise of Richard Alpert's Ketu. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about here for a moment. This Ketu never left him, even though he switched on his Rahu in the 10th. Even though he faced his emotions outside where everyone could see him. Oh, I'm used to doing this, but I'm going to leave. Even though he saw his emotions from the vantage of everyone through an authority, that being his guru, in the face of everyone, and really faced it. This movie franchise of Ketu, the Ketu never left. That's the point I'm trying to say. His Ketu in the 4th themes never left, even when he started to open up to his Rahu in the 10th. This movie franchise was his emotional sensitivity, his emotional fulfillment through psychoanalysis, Emotional fulfillment being a fourth house thing. Psychoanalysis being a Libra thing. Knowing the nature and dynamics of people and of others through Libra. That was the movie franchise. Emotional fulfillment through psychoanalysis as a social role that was fulfilling. Ninth house, Pisces, right? And it was using this Ketu, using this well-placed Ketu. That's how he garnered personal emotional wellness and even a cultural namesake. It's the 11th house vibe. Network associations and the like. People knowing him for his work and respecting him for his work. The fact that it's in Pisces showed that he had a desire to serve others through the Piscean love agenda, through a compassion. And this constantly got him work, this got him experience, and this enriched his 11th house, ultimately. The work that would finally be expressed through his career and everything. And this is his Ketu Lord. We could see that this was a huge part of what Ram Dass was later on in his life. It wasn't just about enacting transformation for these other people. It wasn't just about Mars. It wasn't just about Rahu and Aries being a pioneer, experiencing new ways of being. There was also a strategic psychological awareness in the fourth house, through Libra, through the ninth house, through the compassion and serving. And in the end, so he had this fourth house Libra Ketu experience. And through this emotional foundation was eventually purified of its dross, of its negative karmic capacity. Him isolating himself and thinking, as long as everyone loves me, as long as I'm doing what I am familiar with, then I can satisfy myself because I know I can observe. I'm a professional psychologist and I can observe what makes people happy. The negative aspects of him isolating himself with those aspects. This was purified of its ugliness by being presented to the raw, unabashed altar of India's ancient mysticism of heart and instincts. Particular to Ram Dass, this cured him of his insecurity by exposing himself to a true emotional authority in that guru, but also just to a new world of what he wanted to do with himself towards others, being this pioneering Rahu in the 10th vibe. This eventually forced Ram Dass to face his true calling as a patron of worldwide self-realization. As a well-known person in the field who was actually helping others for the sake of it. He was well known for challenging himself. Eventually people came to him and he helped do the Mars thing, helped them organize their minds, and that was something that he did on the world scale, but it was a challenge for him, which is why he loved to do it. He challenged himself by challenging others, and these are all the 10th house things. His karma yoga and leadership, 10th house. 10th house relates to karma yoga. His karma yoga and leadership attitude during his lecture circuits effectively removed much of the emotional baggage that might have been present in his life due to Ketu. Ram Dass never fully abolished the empathic fourth house sensitivity and emotional and intelligence and knowledge and self-fulfillment, self-reflection, all these fourth house themes. He never stopped doing this and never stopped believing in them. In later life, it was his dharma and emotional motive. It's the fourth house lord in the ninth house, the dharma vibe. This caused him to work out the emotional ramparts of his friends, his family, and his patients through his unique synthesis of psychoanalysis, which is like a Libra thing, but also Eastern yoga, which is like an Aries thing. which is like a real moment to moment, in the moment beingness. Ram Dass's Karma Yoga, his 10th house Rahu, became his own creative sacrifice once he opened himself to it. Once he opened to his 10th house. His actions later in life were not performed solely to secure his emotional fortitude, unlike earlier in his life. Earlier in his life, he just did everything just because everyone was telling him that that's logically his emotional familiarity. He was emotionally attached to his thoughts of what others told him would make him happy. And he did everything in order to secure that myth that I'm doing what has to be done to be happy. This is my role that has been given to me, and I don't feel like I belong in a space where I can own it and take it for myself. He had these, this is how he was acting earlier in his life. He was doing it just to keep building the delusion of happiness, of wealth. Even though he had money and prestige and pussy and and he was homosexual too. And excuse me, sorry, that's my rock and roll sailor talk coming out. But I mean, I meant that sentiment at the time. He was thinking of it in that way. Getting tail, getting lovers that didn't mean much to him. But he was doing all these things just to prop up his false delusion of emotional security, his weird complex of emotional security. And he had a complex of emotional security that he kind of worked through with support from others and these sorts of things, and supporting others. But eventually, that overactive emotional awareness was the franchise which carried Ram Dass all the way through. This emotional oversensitivity and over-awareness, which he had in himself, this was eventually a theme in him which allowed him to see and empathize with others, to understand their emotional ramparts, and to express all of it, to express a sense of self in his worldly things that he did in the world and for the world, etc. In the end, it would be a combination of his Ketu, his well-integrated, healthy 4th house, being expressed through the 9th house through karma, through compassion for others. That desire was uplifted and purified of its dross by being put out in the public sphere, where he was challenged to not just do it because that's what he's used to in his past lives and his Ketu, but he was afforded an opportunity also to challenge his spirit, which brought out the best, which put the winds, the metaphysical winds of Ketu to their best effect, and didn't just push his ship wherever his emotional leanings or karma would push him. And that is that, ladies and gentlemen. That was my derivation, my description of my essay. I really blew it up in a lot of ways, as you might have seen going through. The original essay is only supposed to be, oh gosh, I guess it doesn't say, but I think it was about 3,000 words, something like that. Ram Dass is a beautiful and important figure to me, so I was very glad to do this little case study, use him for a case study. This goes to show, A, the importance of Rahu and Ketu in the chart, and B, their nature. How Rahu uses Saturn's responsibility to drag the impulse for challenge, self-challenge, and expansion through opportunities and networking that's available in the life, through opportunities, through limits, through necessary realities. Saturn draws the best of Rahu, and how Mars draws out the best of Ketu as well. In this case, Mars doing the double duty of supplying the energy field with resources, coming through the second house, which is also involves resources and a stable foundation in Ram Dass's case. But Mars is the sustainer, is the delegator of the energy that Ram Dass's Ketu would express. So we see this duality once again of Ketu and Mars, Rahu and Saturn. And when they combine together, there's this hemispherical symbiosis in the brain, which brings out the best of both of the nodes. And without that, then you'll only have the best of one of the nodes, which, as I always like to say, it'll lead to an excess of something and a lack of something else. If Rahu and Ketu aren't well placed in the chart, and if they don't have some kind of balance to work themselves out. It would be even interesting to look at a chart where the Lord of Rahu and Ketu are in a like a bad angle or something like that. Like, let's say if it was Saturn and the Sun, which is a common thing, because if you have Rahu in Leo and Ketu in Aquarius, and they're in a hard aspect to each other, then that person will be constantly switching between what's more important in life, going forward with the Leo, or retaining what has come through Aquarius and Ketu. That's a tough aspect. That's a tough aspect to deal with, and that would be when Rahu is in the Sun, but Leo. But I digress. I could talk forever about it. For now, I'm just happy to have done this little case study. Stay tuned. I will eventually be doing more stuff on Rahu and Ketu as we come along, and as I unfold more of what I've learned from my classes so far. I love sharing the stuff with you. Please leave a comment. Let me know how I did, what you thought. I'm always intrigued by it. For now, I'm Dustin Cormier for How to Rock Astrology. Thank you so much for watching, folks. I'll see you guys on the next educational video that I do. Take care.